So today we're playing with Lego and talking about what it means to be an artist. So one of the reasons we like Lego is because they make making easy. I try not to force the art into the work, but I try not to let the work get in the way of the art. In the fields where I have the most experience, those are the fields where I'm the most humble because I know how deep they go and I know how shallow my own personal experience is. Oh, hey. So when I say playing with Lego, this is very serious business and we're doing it for functional reasons. Because you see, I've been interested in the idea of bricking my phone. Probably use my phone a little bit too much, got to get that screen time down. And I like the brick app, but I was thinking about doing a literal version using a glass brick. So the idea is to make something that would go on my desk where I could put the phone in it and then the brick over it. And the brick is glass, so I'll be able to see the phone through the brick if there isn't an emergency. But picking up this heavy brick will just slow me down and hopefully curb some of those impulses just to reach for the phone whenever you get kind of frustrated or feel like procrastinating. Okay, so these Legos have been through a lot. I've used these for so many concrete projects. I've used them for making silicone molds. And today, I'm just building a frame around, oh look, a little bit of silicone still left over. Let's see how easy that comes off. But as I was saying, today I'm using them to make a frame around the glass brick. This is going to be the part that ends up holding the brick from sliding off, but I'll have to create some little supports and then create room for the phone underneath it. But I like to kind of establish the dimensions first, because I don't know how many Lego dots a brick is. Oh, the rare purple Lego. Must be from one of my princess sets. So now that I'm thinking about it, I probably should make a channel. So I have to make a ledge that will support the brick so it's not crushing the phone. But I should probably have a channel too so I can keep the phone charging while it's bricked. So now we'll flip this over and start making the floor. Now, a lot of my Legos came from my sponsorship with Toys R Us. That was a really fun project and I got a ton of Lego sets out of it. But some of these are ones that I've had pretty much my entire life. My mom saved all of my Lego when I went off to college and yeah, I picked them up when I started doing YouTube videos and had some ideas. So some of these are 40 years old and it's kind of cool that this one system still is interchangeable after all these decades. So even with Lego, you got to be a little bit structurally mindful every once in a while and kind of reinforce those overhangs. So one of the reasons we like Lego, at least I think, is because they make making easy. Because all the pieces fit together, you don't have to deal with glue or fasteners, hammers and nails. You don't need tools, but you can build so many different things. The other thing that I think on a more sort of art and design level is they teach us about abstraction. If you make a Lego car, it doesn't exactly look like a photorealistic car. It's blocky, it might have kind of like chunky things and some sort of weird pieces, but you can build enough to where, at least as a child, you can recognize that it's supposed to be a car. I think that's actually a really important art and design concept of abstraction. If you can squint your eyes and see a more abstract version of something, it gives you more options for painting something than just going straight with like photorealism and trying to make it look exactly like a photograph. So I think Lego are great for those reasons. They're also the first time I was introduced to the idea of a modular system. Right? Lego and Lincoln Logs are both modular systems, but they don't work with each other. Lincoln Logs was great for a little while, but it was a little too limited with what you could do with it. So Lego was the first toy that I really discovered where it felt like the possibilities were endless and you could, build your own worlds, build things. And I had always used them to make practical things, whether it was, just a pencil box for all my drawing utensils, and then now for coffee makers at the hotel, or in this case, a device to make me use my other devices a little bit less. And Lego is probably my favorite use of plastic ever. Plastic doesn't exactly have like the highest value associations with most consumers, but Lego is like the one plastic that I think we kind of all agree is really fun and the perfect use of the material. Lightweight, a little bit flexible so they grip together, colorful, and also a great torture device should you ever step on one. So when I use Lego to make silicone molds, I like to use these smooth tiles. I don't mind the little bumps, but I just find I get a cleaner finish when I use the smooth tiles. Now, my limitations in my set are when I get to odd numbers. I have a lot of 2x4 smooth tiles, and I have some of these 1x8s and 1x6s, but I want to make sure I don't work myself into a trap where I am just missing a few little smooth tile pieces to cover up the last few dots. So before I stick them down, I like to kind of do a rough layout and make sure that I'm not getting myself into a place where my lack of small tiles becomes this last little thing that holds me back from finishing a project. So I found the critical piece I needed, this 1x2 tile that allowed me to cap off this top row. Now I feel confident to lock these all down. Now I'm going to run into the same issue at the bottom because we have an odd number of tiles. So I think I'm going to run this single line down the center and see how that lines up with the little outlet for the cord. Now we're running into the same problem here where we have 3 dots and we don't have a single 1x3 smooth tile. I do think we might have a 1x4. So I think I might create a little flange with a sloped tile to kind of fix that. So to make up for that odd number tiles, we're gonna put this here, that there. Now we just need one more 1x1 with a couple of 1x6s. Now to make the ledges for the phone, we gotta build up a little rest here, and we're gonna go 2 bricks high. Do a quick fit check. Still plenty of room. And now I can just go to town tiling over all the bumps. All right, we have a fully functional prototype. And we can just leave it like this. There's no rule saying that you can't use Lego for functional purposes and have them on your desk. But I really like this as a gift idea. So for that, I want to make the silicone molds, because once I have the silicone molds, I can very cheaply reproduce these out of concrete, and then my only cost is a few cents of concrete plus the glass bricks, and I think it's a gift that's thoughtful. I'll probably give them away to my creative friends that are always, balancing between the stimulus of inspiration from their phone versus having to put it away so they can get that computer work done. So silicone molds will be the next step, but I think we'll do that as a separate Homemade Modern video. So stay tuned there. And given how many people really liked the concrete molding projects we did recently, I think doing an in-depth tutorial on making your own silicone molds makes a lot of sense. So check out Homemade Modern. All right, Shane, no booze today. It's been a long weekend with the High Desert Art Fair and I've been out a little bit too much, so just coffee. But what do we got?
Do you consider yourself an artist?
Oh, that's a good one. No, although I do make art on occasion. I don't consider myself a writer, but I've written a book and I'm in the process of writing another one. So when I think of artist, I think of it as a profession, and I produce art and I think everyone is capable of it. But for me, when I think of that word, it kind of feels like, we'll put it this way, I always give it the DJ test, right? Like if someone says, I can't remember how many people in finance I've met that, oh, they're like, I'm really a DJ. And it's like, bro, just because you bought the turntables and the equipment and the gear and have done a few parties while your friends roll around on the floor, I guess you DJ'd that night, but your profession is still like Goldman Sachs. So I tend to think of these terms as being related to your profession. That isn't a hard and fast rule. If you want to feel that that is the more interesting and creative side of yourself, give yourself whatever title you want. Put anything you want under your sort of bio on Instagram or LinkedIn. But for me personally, I don't think of myself as an artist because it's a thing I occasionally do not the main thing I do. The thing I do the most regularly is design stuff. And I also build quite a bit too. So I tend to think of myself more as a designer than an artist, but I used to probably be a little bit less comfortable with the term. And I have sort of a strong cringe reflex to certain people I've met that almost use the self-given title of artist as this defensive shield to explain why they're not effective at anything else. Oh, well, I'm just an artist and I'm really focused on the art and really focused on my expression. The other thing that I think is some of the best art I've seen has moments where people are reaching deep down into like the essence of who they are as a human and pulling out ideas that they then translate through skill and precision and craftsmanship into a work that communicates part of what they intended to, or in some cases even not what they intended to, but create something that people can look at and have their own emotional or interpretive experience of. Most of what I make isn't about that at all. I think there are moments or pieces that are. I think of the glass deck or the moon pad as pieces of art. The antler chair is being seen as a piece of art by a lot of the audience, and so thank you. I take that as a huge compliment. I think that was one of the most common comments that I got was, wow, this is art. People like to say that art, oh, this is functional art, right? And they'll say that about really beautiful furniture. Again, it's a huge compliment. So if that's how you feel free to say it. I'm never mad at it. In fact, it always makes me feel a little warm and nice and fuzzy. But I almost think that like when we put functional art, it's kind of, art is already functional. The same way I think dessert is functional. Dessert is functional in a society that isn't starving, and if anything, it is an expression of how we can take time to experience food just for the sake of joy, and I think that's actually a really good thing. I think there's a function to that. Even if it's not the best combination of your macros or where you get your protein, if you're not expressing sort of joy or enjoying moments or the human experience, I would say functionally, you're not doing life right. So I don't think we need to put that caveat, functional art versus art. Art is its own function. So even though calling myself an artist isn't something I'm totally comfortable with, I think there's moments where as a designer, it's really good for me to question, what is the bigger purpose or what is the bigger conceptual cultural messages that I want to communicate through all of my work? And I do find it helpful to start thinking about expression and what it all means when I start making things, or when I'm picking the next 20 things that I'm going to make. I think that kind of introspection can be powerful and helpful when I think you're sitting down and looking at everything that you're making, or you got commissioned to make somebody a dining room table and you want to be an artist and you're trying to be like, how can this person's dining room table be an expression of all of who I am into this woodworking? That's where people, I think, get into a little bit of trouble. And I think what I found is the better move is, okay, someone wants me to build them a table. That's awesome. They respect my work. If I have in a way that I feel could reach a level of art to work into it, great. But I am also perfectly okay just being of service and just being a carpenter, or just being a designer, or just being a woodworker and making a really high functional table. So I don't have to force the idea into. And this is a trap that I see a lot of creatives get into, is they think that if they're a videographer, they think that every video they do has to encapsulate all of their filmmaking ideas. If they're, probably part of the reason why people's first albums as talented musicians tend to be good is because they have a lifetime of expression packed into one album. And then sometimes the second album, which comes out a few years later because now they made it big, they haven't had the same amount of life experience. This happens for comedians. They may be working on one special for 10 years, they hit big, and then there's economic opportunity to create an immediate follow-up a year later, and they don't have those 10 years of lived experience to pack into it. So I try not to force the art into the work, but I try not to let the work get in the way of the art, right? Because every once in a while I surprise myself and I'm like, wait, I don't just have to work with cheap materials and inexpensive things and make things that are DIYable or serviceable. I like doing that, but it's not the only thing I like doing, and I have to almost give myself permission every once in a while if I start to feel an idea percolating up to being like, no, you can slow down for this one. Or it doesn't have to be so fanatically based on function. You can give yourself room to express some curiosity, some ideas, some statements, some philosophies on how you think about the world, if there's a good way to communicate that and package this into a piece. In many ways, I think one of the first pieces that I made and put on YouTube that I would consider art was the garden writing desk. And it's such a different piece from all my other work. Most of my work, modern is in the name of Homemade Modern, was sort of modernish design made with accessible tools and materials and kind of like clean lines and nice serviceable stuff. For this one, there was a functional origin story to it. I was getting ready to work on my book. I wanted a place to sit at, to lock in and focus on writing that book. Kind of a painful process. And so I talked to my writer friends. I'm like, where do you like to write? And one of them said, I rent a little cabin on a small little area of Vermont. It's beautiful. And I have a desk set up in this cabin that gets no Wi-Fi. And I just look out the window and I have like my laptop in front of me and I write. And because there's no Wi-Fi, I'm just locked in and focused. And my only distraction is looking out the window and seeing like the tree branches blowing in the wind. And I was like, cool, I want that, but I couldn't afford the cabin. But I did have a loft that I lived in Boston. And I said, how do I build my own window in my loft? And so I got this, I was thinking about the Chronicles of Narnia books, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I kind of got this idea, what if I could build a portal into a garden that's real? So I got this big Victorian style cabinet, like a wardrobe. And it was like, actually low key, even though most of the stuff I design is modern, I love like kind of good Victorian style stuff. It's just intricate and it's almost like a palette cleanser for everything that I do. And so I built a planter bed with wildflowers in it. And I actually put grow lights inside the cabinets. And so you could open up these two cabinet doors. The doors would then serve as the structural pillars where you could lay in the desk, which fit in a drawer below. And then you would sit at this desk and just look at this flower beds. And it was just different wild flowers of different colors. And they're about 30 to 40 inches away from my laptop. So I had an actual sort of depth. You could smell the flowers, you could smell the soil. And that became where I did a lot of my writing. So I would sit down, open up this garden. It was also nice that there was kind of these blinders. And so I think of that overall project as an art project. Sure, there's like a functional chain of thought for why I sort of created it. But for me, it was also kind of a statement piece about how we're thinking about past relics in terms of furniture design, and in this case, a style that I don't normally work with, how that creates a sculptural object into a room, how we think about nature, where in early times, nature was a danger to us. Then it became something we harnessed through farming, agricultural, mining, and industry. And now it's become this kind of precious luxury, which is a little bit dystopian, but it's kind of where we're at. And I created a fake nature that, real biology, real plants, but it's a fake nature set within a sort of relic. And I thought that was an interesting statement about where we're at in the world. What is luxury? Where do we try to focus? What sort of creates a workspace that's idealized to bring out our best creative ideas? And so it was an expression both of how I work and then also sort of broadly on where I think we are sort of culturally. So that I think was probably the first piece on Homemade Modern that I would consider art. So for this week's recommendations, I'm going to list some podcasts that I listen to. Now, this isn't an endorsement of these podcasts. They're just things that I find interesting to listen to. So our recommendations are going to be these podcasts, but then also I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think when I listen to things where I can't necessarily verify everything that they're saying. And I think that's actually becoming an increasingly important thing to think about because we have access to so much media, but then how are we processing? What are we doing with all this information? And is it making our lives any better? So I listen to the All In podcast and I find parts of it really interesting and instructive, particularly because it's for people that have reached a level of financial success and business success that is so many light years beyond anything I've ever done. I find a lot of what these people say and do kind of reprehensible and tone deaf. And I find that particularly the amount that they complain about how challenging their life is, not very resonant. Now, I still can have empathy for people that have achieved a lot and earned a lot. But for me, my main takeaway is I do like the perspective of people that have more levers of control and power. It doesn't mean I think that they're right. It just means that they have a different life experience than I do. And they give insight into how they think about scaling big businesses and how they look at the regulation landscape in the country and globally as sort of like challenges and things for them to overcome. So I think the part that I'm grateful for about it is that in previous times, it was hard to hear people like this speak candidly and often about current events. But I think, kind of idolizing this as like the goal of everything, it's important to remember that even though these guys have achieved a lot, they still complain a lot. So that's actually the part that I find inspiring, is that even if I don't achieve that level of business success, I think I can be happier. The second podcast is kind of a newer one that I've listened to from a woman named Naima Raza, and it's called Smart Girl, Dumb Questions, and it's an interview format. She gets someone that's an expert in a field, and she asks them kind of like the curiosity, childlike question. It's fast, it's to the point, the guests are great. They explain why, she pushes back, and she pushes them to actually explain it, not just relying on them being experts. So Smart Girl, Dumb Questions, delightful. The one that I enjoyed listening to the most is the How Long Gone podcast. And it's just two guys just kind of talking crap. They sit back, they talk about things they think are cringe. It's just all cultural surfing. They'll talk about music or fashion or these things. It's very funny. They're very witty. It's a flowy conversation. It's kind of like, reminds me of conversations that I have with like my friends, particularly people that have like an aesthetic point of view. So How Long Gone is a lot of fun. But I think the challenge with all these things is that I find that it's easy for me to consume 2 to 3 hours of information, particularly if I'm into workshop working. If I'm doing a bunch of sanding or assembling something that doesn't really take my full focus, I can knock out like 3 hours of information download right into my ears pretty easily. And if you think about how much information that is on a weekly basis, it's like the question I'm stuck with is, what am I loading myself up for? It's like you could have a bunch of files on your laptop, but if they're all useless, like they're just clogging it up and eating up memory. So I've been thinking about that more. It's like, well, is there a purpose to this, or like, how should I be taking it in? And one of the podcasts I listened to a while back, I think it was an interview with this Italian guy that claims that he has this new technology for sort of scanning under the pyramids. And I saw this on Twitter, and it was about new study or new science reveals giant structures under the pyramids. And I was like, okay, interesting. And so I went down this rabbit hole. I started looking on Reddit threads on Egyptology, and I was struck by how confident people were about whether or not this technology works, even though no one else has been able to replicate it other than this one guy, and he won't share how his software works. He just kind of says it does. Doesn't mean he's wrong, also doesn't mean he's right. And you start seeing people sort of take it apart, and I think it's one of the things that Reddit can do really well. But when I look at like all the commentary in aggregate, I just see so many claims where people will say things like, we could never build them now. We don't know how to move a 70-ton stone. And then someone else goes like, dude, we literally have dump trucks that can carry 350 tons. As someone that's rented 110-ton cranes, surprisingly inexpensive for being able to lift 110 tons, I think the only challenge of rebuilding the pyramids would be the funding. And then people say, well, what about that one that's cut so precisely? And this is where I have a lot of issues with podcasts, is they'll have one supposed expert on, and he'll say something that sounds definitive, but that actually isn't. Like, these marks on this piece of granite vase are beyond the accuracy of what we can create today, or they don't show the tooling marks. And I have a background in machining, so I would know. But that's where I get really skeptical, because I know some machinists. I've never met a good machinist that would say definitively they know how everything's machined. I've spent a lot of time working with concrete. I don't know 2% of all concrete techniques. And I'm sure there's ones, and that's just in like kind of publishable literature of like actually engineering reports on it. If you take into the fact that there's probably a whole lot of hands-on experience all over the world working with this material, I probably even know less than that. And that's something that I've worked with regularly for the last like 15 years. I've never met an architect that feels like they have a complete command on all building technology. Like, there's too many of them out there. And you only get to do so many design projects in your life. So to kind of claim definitively that because you don't see a way that this was done, that it had to be done by something otherworldly or almost magical, is a red flag. And so I think that's my takeaway is, when you're ingesting these information, you don't have to like fight it in real time. You don't have to like stop it and look it up. But I find it helpful for kind of looking for patterns of how people talk and how they talk, particularly when they say something that sounds definitive. That's kind of where my red flags kind of go up. Because in the fields where I have the most information, the most experience, those are the fields where I'm the most humble, because I know how deep they go and I know how shallow my own personal experience is. Thanks for making it through another episode of Maker Ranch. Talk to Mike from Modern Builds. We're gonna bring back the Modern Maker podcast in some form, so looks like that's happening. So stay tuned for that, and go ahead and give him a little encouragement on his Instagram. He'll love that. But appreciate you going so far. We love how the show's going, and keep your questions coming, because we'll get to answering all of them.